Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into episode 12 of the Fourth String Sports Podcast. I am your host, Brady, with my co-hosts, Mitch. Mitch, say hi.
Oh, sorry. Hey, what's up? I wasn't listening to what you were saying, bro.
And Skyler. Great start to the
Lovely.
show. And Skyler.
What's up?
All right. We are breaking down episode 12 here today. We have the Denver Broncos on the list, one of the most exciting teams to me. I've been hyping them up since the first episode when we started talking about them. We're also going to break down a little bit in terms of the NBA. There's been some development with a certain player in the NBA who's been known to be a troublemaker, depending on how you view it, maybe causing some trouble. And then, we're going to break down the Denver Broncos. In the last episode, we took care of the Dallas Cowboys. We all had Dallas going to the playoffs in various stages. Mitch and Skyler both had them winning the division. I had them taking the 6th seed. Today, we're breaking down the Denver Broncos, one of the younger, more interesting teams in the NFL. On the next episode, we have the Detroit Lions. We're going to record that on Wednesday, probably drop that on Thursday. Find us on YouTube here, Fourth String Sports Podcast. Find us on SoundCloud and Spotify, Fourth String Sports Podcast, as well as on Facebook and Twitter. And if you guys have any questions, comments, anything you want to let us know about, send us an email. And you can reach us at fourthstringsp@gmail.com. Again, that's FOURTH string SP@gmail.com. So we've talked about the NBA returning quite a bit. In the projected returning being the end of July. I think they said the playoffs were projected to start or end like mid-August, something along those lines. But with everything that's happening with the sports protesting world, which is the protesting world in response to the George Floyd murder, Kyrie Irving, as well as several other players, and last I saw, I believe it was 2/3 of the top 40 players, are seriously considering boycotting the return of the NBA, and their argument being along the lines of, if we go back and play basketball, then we're just forgetting what we were protesting for. Now, that might be a bastardization of their argument. This is a very recent development. But I understand where they're coming from. I do. Mitch, you got something to say about it?
Yeah, some of Kyrie's quotes that he was saying in that meeting last night leaked, and he also talked about how only the top players were really going to get paid and nobody else really was, and that was also a reason why he was considering boycotting.
I understand that. Sorry, go ahead, Skyler.
Well, and I think that, part of me goes, why is everybody talking about this? Because the likelihood of Kyrie even playing in Orlando was low. Mm-hmm. So, whether or not he was going to show up, he would just be showing up and watching anyway. So it's not like I don't think that his opinions are valid and that he's not speaking to a group of NBA players as a whole that are concerned about this. Because I like Brady said, I understand the concerns too. But to put Kyrie as the face of this is a little weird because the likelihood of him already playing was low. And if he wasn't going to be playing, they weren't going to pay him anyway.
Well,
so.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I also understand Kyrie's argument where only really the top guys weren't going to get paid, and in all honesty, that's just because of the way the NBA has their pay contracts set up. A lot of guys get paid more towards the beginning of the season in their guaranteed money, so the end of the season is all really incentive based. It's points per game, it's rebounds per game, it's can you get into the playoffs, can you win a playoff series? It's incentive based like that, and in all honesty, that's how most professional sports pay structures are, where the guaranteed money is paid up front. So then if you cut the guy, you usually don't have any more dead salary on it. And then that way, if he doesn't make his bonuses, he doesn't make his incentives, either because of injury or a shortened season or whatever it might be, then you don't have to pay him that extra amount of money. And because it's all contractual, it's completely legal. So it'd be like me telling Mitch, I'm going to pay you $15 an hour. I'm going to pay you $10 an hour for the first 4 hours of the shift. And then I'm going to pay you $20 an hour for the last 4 hours if you get X, Y, and Z thing done. So it evens out at $15 an hour, technically. But there's a chance that I only have to pay you $10 an hour in the first 4 type thing. And that's how most pay structures work in sports. Now, to go back to the argument itself, I did see Kyrie Irving was the face of it. I did also see Bradley Beal had quite a few comments in regards to it as well, along the lines of, especially in response to people who maybe weren't as supportive of the Black Lives Matter movement. His comments in regards to saying all you really want to do is just sit on your couch and watch us play basketball so that we stop protesting. And I understand that completely. Um, I guess the question that we'll pose is do we realistically think that 2/3 of 40 would be around 25, 22 to 24 players in the NBA, the top 40 players? Do we think realistically that they won't play when the season comes back?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. I know a guy like LeBron has come out and already said like, "Hey, I'm still for the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm going to do everything that's in my power to do it, but I'm also going to come out in the court and ball out." So maybe some guys are going to kind of have that approach, but I definitely think there are going to be guys who are going to take like a Kaepernick kind of approach and be like, "Hey, this movement is way more important than my career, and I have to take a stand and do whatever I can. So I'll sit out if that's what's going to help." And I can totally understand guys taking the LeBron approach. So I don't think it's going to be all of them, but I think you're going to see it kind of split in how they take that approach to addressing this topic.
I saw that when they were getting ready to, another big point of contention was that not all the players had a vote on whether or not when the season was going to be starting back, and that there was some contention to that it was just the reps, and they had to go off of what they had heard. And then also like Chris Paul organized with some of the top players in the league, like LeBron, Kevin Durant, Anthony Davis, people like that, talking about whether or not they want to go back. And the consensus there was that they all wanted to go back. So I think that if this was any other league, I think that the likelihood of them not coming back would be higher. But because it's the NBA, and the NBA has a history of allowing players to voice their opinions on and off the court, I think that the likelihood of a good, like a 2/3, like a good majority of top players not coming to play is a little less, because the NBA allows for their players to voice their opinion. So I think that in the next month that Adam Silver and the NBA front office will work with the players to be able to have an ability to continue this protest, which they have every right to do, because I mean, I agree with them. It was a murder, and the voice needs to be, it needs to be said. But NBA has a history of allowing their players to do this because they understand that they're predominantly black. Most of their athletes are predominantly black, and that this is a very important issue to them. So it's a very important issue to the NBA as well.
So I have a question off of Skylar's comments. Do you think this is more about like, hey, we're gonna sit out until like our voices are heard on this issue, or is it more of like, hey, this issue is like more important than us playing basketball, and we should be focusing on that instead of playing?
I think they could go either way, honestly. I think it depends on who takes the lead on this this opposition, who decides to become the face of this. If it's Kyrie, it's definitely, we're just going to sit out. It's not going to be like we should stop playing basketball because this is more important. Because Kyrie, I think, like being a Boston fan and seeing what Kyrie did for the last 2 years, he's more incentivized by being the star player and by money. And I would be I would be naive not to think that this could be an incentive of why he's speaking out again, because he wouldn't be playing and he wouldn't be making a lot of money off of this. So there's why would back at all? I mean, it's just that's just business. I do think that it depends on who takes the lead on this. I personally have always been for that the players have every right not to play. If they don't think that they want to play, if they don't think that it's the right climate, if they don't think that it's safe enough for them to play, then they shouldn't play. And they have every right to tell the NBA that we're not going to play, because that's what the sport runs through. It runs through the players. The owner, like no sports fan gives a shit about the owner. Like they give a shit about the players, because those are the people that we actually watch and play. If they say that it's not safe or that it's not a good time to go back, then they shouldn't go back.
Yeah, I'd like to preface a lot of this with we completely support not only as a podcast, we completely support the protests. We are all in agreement that what was done to George Floyd was at its core murder, and that there needs to be fundamental change within the policing structure in the United States.
And the
I think
others,
that,
of course.
yeah, I think that this is less about protesting the NBA, and this is more about protesting, obviously, what happened with George Floyd. A lot of this is being made out that like Kyrie and certain players are mad at the NBA, and I don't believe that that is the case. This is the organization that allowed players to come out in "I Can't Breathe" T-shirts at around the same time when the NFL was forcing players to stand for the national anthem. This is the same league that had the first openly gay professional sports player in the United States. And I believe his name was Jason Collins. The NBA has always been the most progressive and the most ready for change. And the NBA has donated and has plans to donate tens of millions of dollars. And teams have organized protests here. The Bucks did it in Milwaukee. They were one of the first teams to do it. The Bucks owners have come out. There's been players. I know that Jason Tatum and some of those other guys were down in Atlanta,
Malcolm
were in
Brogdon.
St. Louis, were all across the country protesting this. And the NBA is by far the most progressive. So I think that these guys are going to play. I think the NBA is going to allow a moment for them to say their piece, and I think the NBA is going to do a lot in order to help the African American community and minority communities in regards to everything that is occurring. Um, I'm all for them protesting. I am, and I'm all for them feeling that if they can't play basketball because it will take away from this, then I 110% support them. And I do that because basketball players have to understand, all professional sports players have to understand the platform that they live on. Like these guys get paid tens of millions of dollars to not only play a game that we all love playing, whether it's basketball or it's football or it's baseball, everybody's played it. But these guys also get paid tens of $1,000,000 to be philanthropists and to donate and to help their communities. I mean, just look at what LeBron James has done for the communities he's been a part of, Northeastern Ohio and Miami and Los Angeles. Northeastern Ohio is fundamentally a better place in the world in 2020 than it was in 2003 when LeBron first came into the league. And a lot of that has to do with LeBron James. And you look at so many of these communities and they're in the exact same way. I mean, look at Giannis's effect on not only Greece, but on Greek immigrants within the United States. Like they have somebody that they can get behind. The same with guys like Dikembe Mutombo, and the same with guys like Manute Bol or Taco Fall or those guys. Like they understand that they are a source of inspiration. So I think the NBA is going to support them 100%. I support them 100%. We're still a couple weeks away before the NBA season does come back, so it is going to be interesting to see what and how it comes back. I think if anything, maybe some of the star players sit out the regular season games and then they come back for the playoffs. That to me, because the NBA is going to go up win percentage, I think there could be a couple players who maybe sit out a game or two during that end part of the regular season before the playoffs start up.
Yeah, and I think another thing to point out too that's really important is that the NBA has been really good at communicating with both their players and communicating with their fans about what it's exactly that they stand for and what exactly they're trying to do in this entire process. So I have, if it was any other league, I would not be this confident. But because I have a lot of faith in Adam Silver as a commissioner and the leader of the NBA, to see that the players' needs and wants are met, because their criticisms and their questions are very justified, especially in the political climate we live in and the continued pandemic that is happening all around the world, that I feel like some people are starting to ignore. I think that it's important that Adam Silver listens, and I have every faith that he will. And we have still, like Brady, you said, we still have a couple weeks before the season kicks off. And I know that there's plans of continued communication between the NBA, PA, and the league offices to figure things out.
Yeah. Mitch, you have any closing thoughts on this before we hop into Denver?
Yeah, I don't think the whole like issue is like it's the players against the NBA when it comes to like how they want to do this. I think it's just more of like NBA players kind of talking amongst themselves and saying like, "Hey, what's most important right now? Us going to play on the court and everybody forgetting about this, and we go back to how it was countless times, or should we make a stand and keep fighting on this issue until we see some real change?" So I think that's what the heart of the issue is right now.
Yeah, like a rallying cry for a lot of players when stuff like this happened was they would hear people just say, well, just shut up and play. You know, they'd hear people say, well, you're just paid to play a game, so just play the game. And now these guys have the opportunity to really stand for fundamental change, or they can shut up and play. And I support them 110% if they choose to, uh, protest and sit out. And I don't think it's going to take away from the game of basketball. I don't think it's going to put any bigger asterisks on the season than there already is. So yeah, I support them. Obviously it's a developing situation. We're probably going to have like 6 or so episodes before the NBA season actually comes out. So we'll keep monitoring on this. But let's move on to the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos, and Mitch is aware of it. I've been talking about them since the very first episode. I've been talking about them since the draft because I felt like no team in the NFL improved themselves as greatly as the Denver Broncos did. The Denver Broncos, to me, are the absolute, hands down winners of the 2020 NFL offseason. And I think that as an organization, they have finally steered themselves in the correct direction under the leadership of John Elway, which is the most astonishing part, to continued success. So let's jump into their season a little bit. Last year, the Denver Broncos went 7-9, which is impressive considering they started the season out 0-4. They even at one point in the season were 2-6. Then Drew Lock shows up, the second-round pick out of Missouri at quarterback. He finally gets the chance to start after starting the season on the injured reserve list. Joe Flacco sits. Brandon Allen has a few games. Drew Lock shows up. Drew Lock leads Denver to 4 of 5 wins to clear out the season. He takes over as starting for the Denver Broncos at 3-6. They end up being 3-8. They end up being 7-9 to finish the season out. Drew Lock, in the 5 games that he played through for 1,020 yards, 64.1% completion rating, 7 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Had he played for the whole season, probably comes out to about 3,000 yards, 21 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. And those are really about the numbers we see consistently out of rookie quarterbacks. That's about what Mitch Trubisky's first season numbers were. That's about what Kyler Murray's first season numbers were. So a respectable number had he played the whole season. Philip Lindsay, the undrafted free agent from last year who made the Pro Bowl, first one to ever do that, ran for 1,011 yards, 7 touchdowns. Cortland Sutton, who I've always thought was a really underrated wide receiver coming out of SMU, had 72 catches, 1,112 yards, 6 touchdowns. And Noah Fant, the Nebraska homeboy who went to Iowa, had 40 catches, 562 yards, and 3 touchdowns. I think he's a really underrated tight end. So before we get into their last season and their free agent losses and pickups here, where do you guys rate Denver? In or in need of a rebuild, in or in need of a reload, 8-8 team, playoff tier, or Super Bowl tier?
Man, I gotta say that they're like dead middle in between 8-8 or playoff team, because there's a couple factors that are either gonna propel them to where they want to be, or it's gonna hold them back from the potential that me and you see them, Brady. So I think if Drew Lock continues to like take that first couple steps and improve as a quarterback, they definitely could be in playoff contention next year. But obviously, if he regresses or becomes like Mitchell Trubisky, then obviously they can't go as far. And then is how John Elway handled this year an aberration, or is this a things for things to come? Because if he continues this, obviously they're going to be in a good shape. Or if he goes back to some of his old ways, then they're going to be in worse shape. So I think depending on those two factors kind of determines if they're going to be like 8-8 or in playoff contention.
Yeah, I kind of have to agree with them, with both of you. I think that this team has a ton of potential. they could challenge Kansas City for domination in the AFC West. But the thing is I have to look at it on paper. I have to see what was produced from last season and what they gained this season. And for me, it's that looking at all of it and just where I can comfortably put them is 8-8. I think that they're a middle of the road team. Part of it has to do with their schedule. Part of it has to do with the division they play on, which I still think the AFC West is one of the toughest divisions in pro football, at least. It's just kind of like what we was talking about. Did John Elway actually turn the corner here? Did he actually make the right moves, and is he going to continue to make the right moves, or is he going to continue to hurt this organization with questionable quarterback moves, with questionable free agency and draft decisions?
I'm going to put this team as, I'm going to say they're in the low mark of the playoff tier. Year in and year out, the last couple of seasons we've had, I believe it was 5 new teams in the playoffs, like almost every year. And I think Denver could be one of those. I put Denver in relation to Kansas City in a very similar way as I put Minnesota in relation to Green Bay, in that for the seasons to come, there's going to be one team that's going to be dominant. And that's understood, right? Like, and I'm not talking about Minnesota in relation to Green Bay right now. Let's say like 10 years ago, right? In that Kansas City is by far a better team than Denver is. But I think Denver can be good enough that if Kansas City has a slip-up season every now and then, they could win the AFC West. And I see Denver as a perennial playoff caliber team. Now, whether or not they make it every year is a different story. But I like what I see on paper. I like the swagger that Drew Lock brings in. I like that John Elway is maybe finally listening to some other people in the organization, because it seemed like the Joe Flacco trade was all him. It seemed like the decision to let Chris Harris Jr. walk was all him. But then in my mind, they made the most underrated trade that we're going to get into, and then they made a pretty solid trade as well in the AJ Bouye trade in order to help. I think they have really fantastic players all across that defense. I think that offensive line got better and it got healthier. I think Chad Johnson even said it. The Denver Broncos look like the first team in the NFL who are going to have 3 number 1 wide receivers in the guys that they drafted to go with Cortland Sutton. I've always been high on Cortland Sutton. He was a stud for my fantasy team last season. I like Denver. I like what Denver has to bring to the table. So let's break down their free agent losses here. Joe Flacco, after Denver trades for him, gets cut. He goes to the Jets. Joe Flacco was 2-6 as the Denver quarterback before getting hurt. He threw for 1,822 yards, 6 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Derek Wolfe, who we talked about in the Baltimore episode, I think he's not talked about enough in the huge loss that Denver suffered right there, because Derek Wolfe to me is a stud. 34 tackles, 7 sacks. He only played in 12 games last year. So a defensive tackle who put up 7 sacks and only played 3/4 of the season is pretty good. They lost Connor McGovern, their starting center, went to the Jets. And they lost Chris Harris Jr., a Super Bowl veteran, really great corner. He went to the Los Angeles Chargers, 56 tackles, 1 interception. All in all, they lost some big names. Chris Harris Jr. was obviously the biggest one. But to me, the Derek Wolfe loss was massive. Derek Wolfe did not get enough credit for what he did because he was sandwiched between Von Miller and Bradley Chubb. Derek Wolfe is a great player, and him now going to Baltimore is a big loss, especially in run defense. Derek Wolfe was really good in run defense and really good in between the guards, and in between a guard and a center, just busting in there. To me, he's a really underrated loss for Denver.
Yeah, when looking at the losses, you definitely see a lot of guys that they lost, and you're like, hey, this team might suffer. But as we get into like the next segment of this, what they gained, it kind of makes up for it. So they lose Derek Wolfe, but then they gained a really great defensive lineman to take his place. They lost Ronald Leary and Connor McGovern, but they made up for it with some good interior linemen. Mm-hmm. So I feel like they've definitely made up for what they've lost. So it kind of makes it at like neutral, I guess.
Yeah, I kind of have to agree with both of you. I think that Denver did a really good job of replacing old veteran talent, like Super Bowl experience, with some young players that have high upsides. When we get to their draft, we can get a little bit more specific about what they were able to do on their defense and with some weapons for Drew Lock. But I am still kind of dumbfounded by why they let Chris Harris Jr. walk. I thought that he was still easily could have put up some really good years with them. And it kind of it dumbfounded me why they let Chris Harris Jr. walk, because he wanted to stay and they had opportunities to let him stay. Um, and it but all in all, they had one of the better off seasons that Denver's had and since they acquired Peyton Manning, honestly.
And I agree. And toward the beginning of the season, it was very apparent that Chris Harris Jr. wanted to stay. And then you got to remember that his name was up on the trade block before the trade deadline. Denver realized that they didn't, or that they weren't going to have the cap space to pay him the money that he wanted. And they also had faith in some of their other members of the secondary. And so then toward the end of the season, especially once Denver was struggling, like in that middle portion, Chris Harris Jr. was very vocal about him being like, yeah, I'm probably not coming back, you know? And it's not that I don't think he didn't want to come back. I think that there was just an understanding that they're going to be parting ways here. Very similar to like Green Bay with Brian Balaga, where the fans are all like, why aren't you re-signing this guy? Like, why is there any contract talks happening? And Brian Balaga is like, they just haven't reached out, you know? And unfortunately, that's just part of the game. But let's move into their free agency additions and their additions through trades as well. Best trade to me by far, and I've talked about it several times, they acquired Jarrell Casey from the Tennessee Titans for a 7th-round pick. Jarrell Casey last season, 44 tackles, 5 sacks. He's a defensive tackle, defensive end mix. He can play both. I think he's always been one of the most underrated interior defensive linemen. I think now that you're going to line him up with Von Miller and with Bradley Chubb, the Denver defensive line looks so scary to me and looks on par, like we talked about, with the Chicago defensive line, where with Mack and Robert Quinn and Akeem Hicks. But Denver's looks dominant. I mean, for a Denver team that struggled to get sacks in the beginning part of the season last year, his addition is going to put a lot more pressure on the interior offensive lines of not only the AFC West, but the rest of the AFC. I think he's a great pickup. I love this pickup. I've been talking about this trade for a while. I love this pickup for Denver.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. I'm a huge Jarrell Casey fan. To me, he's the most underrated NFL player in the whole league, and you can at me at that. I think he's going to come in and he's going to show everybody why you should put respect on his name. He just made this front seven, that defensive line, the whole defense a lot better.
He deserved more than a 7th-round pick.
Exactly.
It was disrespectful is what it was.
I think this is more of a steal than the DeAndre Hopkins trade, in my opinion.
Really?
Yeah. And then AJ Boye, I think he can fill the hole that Chris Harris Jr. left. He's a little bit younger, and I think that ability level where they're at their careers right now, I think it's about even. Melvin Gordon, I think he's going to be a good running mate for Philip Lindsay. I'm excited to see that tandem, and hopefully we can see more of the Melvin Gordon at Wisconsin. Graham Glasgow, I think he'll be a great center or guard wherever they want to put him. I think he really upgrades that line, and Drew Lock is going to need it since they have a really bad left tackle, so you got to make sure that every other position is stout. And I really love this incoming free agent class.
Yeah, I have to agree. The free agent trade acquisitions, like again, I'll say that this is the best offseason that Denver's had since they acquired Peyton Manning. Like, bars none, both sides of the ball, easily. I do say that does not mean that these players that they're coming in, especially Melvin Gordon, in my opinion, have some questions. Not that they're not capable and not ability, but more of how they fit in with the team and the scheme, kind of. But I agree, their defense is going to be scary good. I still have some concerns about their secondary because they losing Chris Harris Jr., that veteran presence. I think AJ Boye is a great player, and he showed it when he was with the Jacksonville team that went to the AFC Championship and was such a dominant defense, especially in the secondary. But I think that they answered questions that we didn't even know that there need to be questions to. I think that their offensive line is the most improved part of this team, honestly, and that it's gonna be, again, this team has such high potential. I just hope they live up to it.
You know, going to your point on the secondary, I think to exactly what Mitch said, I think AJ Boye gives you a serviceable replacement. I would probably put Chris Harris Jr. a little bit ahead of AJ Boye. And AJ Boye definitely struggled because he went from being the number 2 corner in Jacksonville to then when Jalen Ramsey was traded, he was forced to cover guys like DeAndre Hopkins. He was forced to cover guys that Jacksonville had to play. I'm not as worried about Denver's secondary because of a guy by the name of Justin Simmons. Justin Simmons to me is the most underrated safety in the NFL, and I wish some more people would put some respect on his name. In 4 seasons, he's had 11 interceptions. Last year, he had 98 combined tackles. He had 4 interceptions just last year. I think that he's a fantastic player, and I love what Denver's doing. They're getting more athletic. Like, an interesting thing came out, and we'll talk about it in their draft. If you looked at every team's combined 40 times, Denver's average 40 time is a 4.45, which is tied for second best in the NFL. Tied with Kansas City, and the number 1 team, interestingly enough, was the New York Giants, 4.42.
It was skewed because of Saquon.
Where we talk about, all the speed that Kansas City has. Well, now Denver has speed on their own in order to help cover it. And that's huge. And then Denver offensively, as we're about to get into their draft, Denver added enough speed offensively to really take advantage of Kansas City. And, we've talked about it a few times where it doesn't seem like some NFL teams are doing enough to take on the number 1 team in their division. Denver, to me, between this draft that we're about to get into in their free agency signings, Denver did enough to give the Chiefs a run for their money. The talent is there. Now, can Vic Fangio in season 2 bring it all together? That's the question. Back to just some of the pickups there. Graham Glasgow, I think, is a great pickup. I think he's an upgrade at center over McGovern, who they lost. Graham Glasgow has missed 1 game in the last 3 seasons. This is only his 5th year. Detroit didn't decide to keep him because of the money that he was asking for. Melvin Gordon definitely had an off season. 612 yards, 8 touchdowns. He only played in 12 games because he held out. Another large reason to that was that by the time he did show up, there was an understanding that Austin Eckler was the starting running back, and he didn't get the snaps that he would have liked. As well as, we've talked about it a lot, the Los Angeles offensive line was bad, and it was really bad these last couple of seasons. The other really underrated pickup to me is Christian Covington, the defensive tackle from Dallas. I think that he helps to shore up that interior alongside Jarrell Casey. He had 28 tackles and a sack last season. I just love it. I love their free agency pickups. So let's move into their Go ahead.
One other thing real quick before we go to the draft. Vic Fangio also decided to replace his offensive coordinator. So they have a new offensive coordinator too in Denver.
And that to me is huge because the Denver offense to start out that season was abysmal. And it got better as the season went on. I mean, they blew out Houston in Houston when Houston was coming off a win against the Patriots. Like, that was the next week. Houston beats the Patriots on Sunday Night Football, and then Denver walks into Houston and obliterates them. It wasn't even a close game, Yeah. So maybe Denver having a little bit more continuity, maybe Denver being a little bit more offensively focused, because that was the question with Vic Fangio. This was the defensive coordinator from the 12-4 Chicago team. How is he going to work with a young quarterback and stuff like that? I'm so excited to watch Denver football in 2020. So let's move on to their draft here. Denver had 10 draft picks in total. They had 3 from various trades with teams like Pittsburgh and Washington in regards to guys like Case Keenum, as well as getting up to the Noah Fant trade. Round 1, pick 15, Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver, Alabama. 72 catches, 1163 yards, 10 touchdowns. We're going to go through their whole draft, and then we're going to have everybody grade it and tell us what they think. Round 2, pick 46, KJ Hamler, wide receiver, Penn State. 56 catches, 904 yards, 8 touchdowns. Round 3, Michael Ujamudia, corner out of Iowa, who had 3 interceptions and a forced fumble recovery. Round 3, they had 3 third-round picks. They drafted Lloyd Cushenberry, center out of LSU. Other round 3 pick, McTelvin Agin, defensive tackle from Arkansas. 4th-round pick, Albert, and I'm going to attempt to pronounce this last name, and I am so sorry for it. Albert Okwugbanam, I believe, tight end out of Mizzou, where he played with Drew Lock in what would be his sophomore season. Round 5, Justin Strand, linebacker, Wake Forest. Round 6, Natane Muti, guard out of Fresno State. Round 7, Tyree Cleveland, wide receiver, Florida. And round 7, Derek Tezuka, edge rusher from North Dakota State University. So how do you guys grade Denver's draft class?
I'm going to give it a B+. I really like the Jerry Jeudy pick as their first one. To me, he was my number 1 wide receiver, and I think he's going to be an amazing number 2 guy across from Cortland Sutton. KJ Hamler, I think, is going to be a great 3rd guy, so it's going to be a dangerous wide receiver trio. I like that they added some depth in the secondary and on the defensive line. I think Lloyd Cushenberry is just going to upgrade that offensive line even more, and it'll be interesting to see if he takes the center spot or if he'll kick out the guard and let Glasgow take center. I think getting Drew Lock's tight end was a good move. Somebody who has chemistry with him and could be a nice target for him. And then I think their last pick, Derek Tezuka, I think he's an underrated pass rusher. I think he could be this year's Max Crosby. And then the reason why I can't bump it up is because they took some smaller school players who you don't know what's going to happen. So it's kind of like, are they going to be good? Are they going to be bad? So that's what keeps them from getting to that A category. But yeah, B+ overall.
Yeah, I kind of have to agree here with Mitch. I think it's a B+. I like the fact that they added some weapons for Drew Lock. I mean, when we're looking at it, the only really effective weapons he had in the passing game were Cortland Sutton and Noah Fant. And Noah Fant had a really slow start of the year. He had 500 yards over the season. He easily could have been putting up Gronk numbers if they were if
he also was not utilized correctly. I mean,
not at all.
Season with Joe Flacco.
Not all of it was Noah Fant's fault. I will give it to him. You saw an uptick in his numbers when Drew Lock stepped onto the field. But it's still it's still when you go from 1,000, you have Cortland Sutton at your 1,000-yard receiver, and then you have Noah Fant as your 500 yards. That's a huge drop off. No other wide receiver was even coming close to those numbers. So I like the fact that they took Jerry Jeudy. He wasn't my number 1 wide receiver. I still think CeeDee Lamb was a better wide receiver. But Jerry Jeudy was an easy number 2 for me. KJ Hamler, I think they reached on him just a little bit. I think he could have been available later, depending. They might have had to trade up just a little bit, but still, I think that they reached. And that's kind of what stopped me from going into an A. Overall, I love their picks. I think that, again, they addressed issues and they gave Noah Fant some young athletic Drew Lock some young athletic players to give him somebody to throw to, give him some weapons. But I think that in some cases they might have reached just a little bit.
So I am going to give Denver the first A+ draft grade of the season. And now hear me out. In the 4 players that they drafted in response to receiving the ball, last season alone, all 4 players combined for 2,700 yards and 25 touchdowns. We talk about the underrated pick to me is the tight end from Mizzou. Last season, without Drew Lock, 26 catches, 306 yards, 6 touchdowns. The season before with Drew Lock, 43 catches, 466 yards, 6 touchdowns. The season before that with Drew Lock, 29 catches, 415 yards, 11 touchdowns. I talked about it when we talked earlier about Joe Burrow, and I brought up Coby Fleener going to Indianapolis the same draft as Andrew Luck did. A tight end is always one of a quarterback's, it's his check down, it's his safety net. And you look at really good quarterbacks, usually they have a really good tight end. Tom Brady with Rob Gronkowski, Drew Brees with Jared Cook, Phillip Rivers with how long with Antonio Gates, any Kansas City quarterback with Tony Gonzalez for as long. The list, like we can just go on and on. I think Noah Fant is obviously the first tight end, but adding this depth is huge. Jerry Jeudy, to me, was the best all-around wide receiver in the draft. I liked him more than I liked CeeDee Lamb. KJ Hamler, I'm going to disagree with you, Skyler. I think he was a steal. KJ Hamler, to me, very easily could have been a first-round pick had the Penn State quarterback play been a lot better last season, and it wasn't. KJ Hamler was really good the season he was with Trace McSorley, and he wasn't as productive this season, as well as because Penn State's offense just wasn't as good. But the ultimate reason I give them a draft of an A+ is this. They lost a center in free agency. They lost a defensive tackle in free agency. They lost a corner in free agency. So what did they draft? They drafted, to me, one of the most underrated corners in Iowa, out of Iowa, and Michael Ojemudia. I think he has such a high prospect ceiling. They draft a center in Lloyd Cushenberry, and they draft a defensive tackle in McTelvin again. All positions that they addressed in free agency, but what did they do? They added depth to it. They understood where the weakness was, and they added depth to it. Lloyd Cushenberry can play center. He can move into guards. They also drafted a guard in Moody, who was a hit or miss for me. The last few picks, I can go either way on. But the reason I give him an A+ is that those first 6 picks are so good to me that it makes up that if they get no production out of the last 4, I love it. I love this draft. I think Denver won the draft. I love it. I love the Denver draft.
When you said that you gave him an A+, all I thought about was the scene in A Christmas Story when the teacher's grading Ralphie's paper and she just goes like, A+, plus.
If I'm rating their entire offseason, Denver just did such a good job, and it's so admirable to finally watch Denver put anything together. And I hate the Broncos. With my mom being a Bronco fan, I hate the Broncos, and I hate John Elway, but I can
never get over that Super Bowl.
Never going to get over that Super Bowl. But I can respect what they did this offseason, and what they did this offseason was straight ball out.
See, I do agree that, again, I will continue to say Denver had the best offseason since they acquired Peyton Manning, and I think that the players that they added on this team will lead to very, very competitive Denver teams throughout the years. But this isn't a normal season, and it's not a normal off season. And when you're adding all of these young talent, because I'll tell you, these are the offense that they are adding, that they're putting together is very, very talented and has such high potential. But you're adding a new offensive coordinator with a new system because Vic Fangio is a defensive coach. There hasn't been any OTAs. There hasn't been any player meetings with coaches, otherwise over Zoom. And according to John Harbaugh, it's going to be a lot longer before we're going to be able to do that because what the NFL wants to do is impossible. I think it was humanly impossible was the exact words he used about what is needed for training camps to happen. So it's like if it was a normal offseason, I would say that going into this year, Denver has the potential. Like Denver easily could be competing for that AFC West slot. But because it's not a normal offseason, because it's not going to be a normal season, it's hard for me to think of that because it's going to have some growing pains. There's going to be a lot of growing pains when it comes to this new offense. I think that I think that it helps Denver that the most sturdy and the best part of their offense is their offensive line, and that is the most improved.
Especially with the healthy Juwan James playing. That's the
especially
thing
with the health. That helps. And I think that their defense is going to be a top 10 defense in the league because it always is. And having Vic Fangio, he's going to find ways for this defense to continuously be good. It's just looking at it and their offense and everything new that they have to add and all of the new players that we all agree are starting caliber. The 3 wide receivers are going to be Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, and KJ Hamler. Like that's who those are going to be their top three. It's a lot of new information that's going to be thrown at players and new players that are being put in the system that it's going to take some growing pains, in my opinion, and you'll see that reflected in my schedule.
I don't know. I don't have those problems in Madden, so I probably won't see it here.
Well, not everybody can be you, Mitch.
I
I know.
I definitely agree that there's going to be some growing pains, and if you look at their first 4 weeks here, let's just their first 5 weeks. Tennessee, Pittsburgh, Tampa, the Jets, and New England. Those are all teams that, with the exception of the Jets, are all expected to be playoff caliber teams. But here's my thing. The Bama offense, the Penn State offense, the Mizzou offense, the Chargers offense, as well as the Denver offense last year focused on pretty much all the same thing. It was a spread West Coast style offense with a single H-back. And all of those guys are coming from college systems that are going to run that exact formation. So, yeah, it's a new playbook, and there's some nuances to it. But when Denver was doing when the Broncos were, as a team, did protests in Denver, they actually, Drew Lock actually talked about it. He said, like, we've been having 50-player Zoom meetings the entire time. Like, everybody's got the playbook. Everybody knows the playbook now. Granted, knowing it and putting it in practice are two completely different things. And I'll agree with you on that, Skylar. And that this is an offense that's going to be very rookie and young player centric. But I just I think that
just to say it's like I agree with the fact that when you're going from these, like, the college offenses that these teams ran were very similar to what Denver is probably going to run when it comes to this next offseason. What I'm saying is that Jerry Jeudy, besides LSU and besides Florida, didn't go up against all-star defensive backs, whereas he's going to have to in those first 5 games. Those, except for the Jets, those are some quality defenses that these young rookie skill players are going to have to run against. And I agree with the talent is there, and I'm sure, and I know Drew Lock is a leader because he showed. As a Nebraska fan, I hate Mizzou. There is no team I hate more than Mizzou, except for maybe Colorado. And I can tell you that Drew Lock is.
What did you say?
I said not Big Red.
No, I love Nebraska. Why would I hate Nebraska?
I'm talking about the team in Madison, Wisconsin. The original Big Red.
We can't get it, guys. Guys, we can't do it. We can't do it. We can't do it, okay? Last time Skylar got really angry. Mitch, you're just trying to edge him on. We can't do it. Skylar, finish your point in regards to the thing. Mitch, I will mute you. I swear to Christ, I will.
But what I was saying is that these defenses are KJ Hamler. There's some pretty quality defensive backs in the Big Ten. And where I was going with Mizzou, Drew Lock is a leader, and you saw that at Mizzou. He made Mizzou better than they were. Yeah. You can tell because after he left, Mizzou fired their head coach because the head coach wasn't doing anything. It was Drew Lock that was making their somewhat successful and a very competitive SEC West team. And he continuously improved at Mizzou. I am just saying that with all of the new pieces that need to be added into this offense, with the mix of the most unorthodox offseason and season we're looking at in the history of the NFL, you have to take a pause.
Yeah, I totally agree with that point. I totally see where you're coming from. With them getting so many young players at positions where they're going to need to contribute for them to get to where they want and not having a normal offseason, I definitely think there's going to be some pains, but I think they'll be able to overcome it and still have a successful season. And to this point, I'll talk to more about it when we get there, but I think it's going to be more evident in a team like the Minnesota Vikings, who had the most players drafted and at key positions, and it could really sink their team if they don't improve. So that's where I think we'll see it the most. But yeah, I totally see your perspective on this.
And I guess my counter to that is the guys who already know how it's going to be, the Cortland Suttons and the Noah Fants and the Drew Locks, they also have each other to rely on. So as we see consistently in the NFL, the new guy is going to ball out eventually. It's going to take a couple of weeks. And I think that even with just Drew Lock and Melvin Gordon and Noah Fant and Cortland Sutton, this Denver team still won 4 of 5 games last year, that Drew Lock started. And I think that the first half of their schedule is brutal. I'll give them that, and they're going to struggle. But, man, if they can put it together in that second half, God, does Denver look like a strong team. And the thing is that Denver looks like a strong team for years to come. So I'm going to make my prediction right now. The Denver Broncos will be in the Super Bowl within 3 seasons.
Oh, okay.
Yes. No.
I was like, damn, Brady.
I'm not going to say right now. And the reason that I put it out to 3 seasons is that it's going to rely on what contract Patrick Mahomes gets. Because Kansas City feasibly cannot keep a lot of the guys they have if they're going to pay Patrick Mahomes the money that he demands to pay, that he's going to need to be paid. The Raiders haven't taken a step. The Chargers haven't taken a step. And I would make the argument that as a conference, the AFC, maybe just by the loss of Tom Brady, took a huge step backwards. And that's why, like, when we get to our playoffs here, you're going to see that 6 of the 7 teams in the NFC that I have in the playoffs have at least 10 wins. And, feasibly could be higher than that. The AFC to me just seems like a slugfest where everybody's going to beat the crap out of each other, and no one, with the exception of Kansas City and Baltimore, are going to show any real Super Bowl potential. And that gap, that vacuum, leaves just enough room for the Denver Broncos to slide in there and just maybe do enough to get to the Super Bowl in 3 years. Obviously, we'll have to see how it works out. But the Denver Broncos, as of right now, are going to be in a Super Bowl within 3 seasons. So, let's break down our schedule predictions. Denver, we've talked about, I think, only twice so far. Believe. Yes, twice. We've talked about them in relation to the Atlanta episode and in relation to the Buffalo episode. So go back and listen to those. Carolina as well. Sorry, 3 times. So go back and listen to those episodes. Week 1, they start at a home game against Tennessee. This is Jarrell Casey going up against his old team. This was one of the games that caused Marcus Mariota to lose his starting job in Denver to be replaced by Ryan Tannehill, a rematch of last season where the Denver Broncos won. I have the Denver Broncos coming out and winning this game. Large part of it is because Tennessee, and we'll talk about it when we get to the Titans in 30 episodes from now, Tennessee did not address the loss of Jack Conklin, and that offensive line is so questionable to me. They have a great halfback in Derrick Henry. They have a good wide receiver in A.J. Brown. They have a pretty good tight end position. But between that loss on the offensive line and some of the losses they had on defense as well, I don't think Vic Beasley makes up for some of their losses. I think Denver wins week 1.
I disagree with you. I think Denver's going to come out with a loss out of the gates. I think it's mostly due to Skyler's points about this being a weird offseason and how they're going to adjust. And I don't think they're going to become firing out on all cylinders right out of the gate. But we're a team like Tennessee. They've kept mainly the same core, the same coaches, all that stuff. I think that continuity is really going to be the edge factor for this win.
I would have to agree with Mitch. I think that I think that Tennessee, like you were saying that like Baltimore and Kansas City are the top 2 in the AFC. Tennessee's my 3rd. I think Tennessee is the 3rd best team in the AFC because of continuity, because they have a patriotic style of next man up. Like, honestly, it's a very that they train their players and practice with the idea you can go in any moment. And I honestly think Mike Vrabel is going to be a very successful coach for the next couple of years. And I think that because of that and the culture that they're building there, and just the questions on continuity and the new things they have to add, that Drew Lock stumbles a little bit in this first game.
All right. Whatever. So, week 2, they go to Pittsburgh. This is one of my highlighted week 2 matchups. This is really where we're going to see how Drew Lock does against a projected top 5 defense in the NFL in Pittsburgh. I have Denver losing this. Pittsburgh has way too many – just defensively, Pittsburgh is way too strong. I think Pittsburgh has a really underrated offense, and we argued about it in the last episode, and we'll argue about it again when we get to the Pittsburgh season. Pittsburgh wins this game. Denver, to me, it's going to be competitive, but Pittsburgh wins.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Pittsburgh gets this win. I think their defense is just going to be too overwhelming. And I think that the Steelers' offense will be good enough to be able to score some points and yards on the Broncos' defense. I think they have some good wide receivers, and I think James Conner, he's not a world beater, but he's solid enough to be effective, and I think that gets them the win.
Yeah, for me, it was picking. It was honestly, is it Pittsburgh's offense or Denver's offense that fires on all cylinders right now? And I do think that Pittsburgh's defense also just they're going to hammer that. What you're talking about, that left tackle is not a good spot for the Denver's offensive line, and I think that Drew Lock's going to be running a lot, and that's going to put him off edge. And again, him facing one of the top defenses in the NFL is going to be hard. And Denver's not going to win this game if he's going to be running all over the place.
All right, interesting. Week 3, they host the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm going to put this at a loss, and this was actually difficult for me because when I first did this season schedule, I actually had Denver winning this game. But the more that I thought about it, the more, to your guys' points, that continuity is going to be an issue, and I'm not arguing with that. I just think that Tampa, at least on paper, is a much better team. I'm curious as to the Tampa defense. Like, Mitch and I have gone back and forth on it. Like, if you look at the numbers, yeah, they're really good, but any defense is really good when your quarterback throws 30 interceptions and they got to play on a short field every single drive. Like, we'll go back and forth on it, but I have Tampa winning that game.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to be too much for Denver. Tom Brady being the quarterback of an offense like that, I don't think the Broncos defense is going to be able to keep up with that. And I think that I like the Tampa Bay defense. They're good. I don't think they're like the 85 Bears, but I think they're good. And I think they'll be able to stop Drew Lock.
I will continue to say this. Tampa Bay does have the most underrated defensive player in the NFL, in Levante David. He is the most underrated defensive player in the NFL. Only one All-Pro selection, which is a shame because he's putting up Ray Lewis-style numbers in his first 8 seasons. Also, to Brady, your point, Tampa Bay was 15th in the league in yards allowed with their quarterback throwing 30 interceptions. If they have Tom Brady going in,
now imagine had their quarterback not thrown 30 interceptions.
It's going to impact how good this defense is.
No. What I'm saying is that the defense was 15th when their quarterback threw 30 interceptions. Had he only thrown 10, Tampa would be 25th because their defense would have had to play on a full field more times than they did.
No, I'm going to disagree with you. I'm going to say that the Tampa Bay defense, the reason that they were only 15th in yards selection and yards allowed is because their quarterback threw 30 interceptions and they had to be on the field all the time. The fact that they had to be on the field all the time, 30 turnovers just in interceptions, and the fact that they still were only 15th in yards allowed, that's any defensive coordinator would love that. Any defensive coordinator would love that for their team. So I'm going to say that Tampa Bay is going to be a top 10 defense this next season. That's my take. Because
top 10 defense next season. All right. We'll put a bet on that.
Yeah.
We'll put a bet on that.
Week
4 matchup, they go to New York to play the Jets. This is an easy win for me. Adam Gase is still the head coach with gangrene. The Jets, Jets. LOSE this game. So LOSS this game. English wasn't my strong suit.
Oh, was it?
You spelled it right the first time, Brady.
I think this is
not loss.
Wait, what did I say? I meant to say the Jets will LOS or will have a LOSS is what I meant to say. Whatever. It doesn't matter. Okay, anyway, they lost. Mitch?
All right, so I think this is where Drew Lock gets his first win with his new team and with him being like the official starter and not just like coming in for the starter who started week 1. Anyways, But yeah, I think Denver's a way better team than the Jets, and this is going to be an easy win, and I think a confidence builder for them going forward.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I think that people know my opinions on the Jets. It's not just because I'm a Patriots fan. It's because the Jets suck. And Drew Lock will tear apart this defense and win the game.
All right, so through 1/4 of the season, I have the Denver Broncos at 2-2. You and Skylar, Mitch and Skylar both have them at 1-3. Week 5 matchup, they go to New England to play the Patriots. I really, really wanted to give them a win here, but I can't do it. I think Bill Belichick is just going to figure out that weird soft spot in order to kill Drew Lock. I think the Patriots are going to have an underrated offense, in large part to the Marquise Lee signing that has not been talked about as much as I think it deserves to be talked about. Any quarterback who's now going to be able to play with Marquise Lee and Julian Edelman and James White, I think is, and hopefully N'Keal Harry can live up to his potential, I think makes a really great wide receiver tandem. Denver starts 2-3 with a loss to the Patriots here.
Yeah, I was feeling the same way that you were, Brady. I was really going back and forth with this Patriots game, and I really wanted to give it to Denver, but I mean, this is Bill Belichick, and they're in New England. Even though there's not fans, they're still in New England, and even though there's a rookie quarterback, I'm sure he's going to put up like 10,000 yards. And I think even though the Patriots did lose some key contributors on that defense, it's still going to be stout, and I think that the Patriots' offense is going to be effective enough for them to get the upset over the Denver Broncos.
For everything you guys said is the reason I also had New England winning. I also think that I was talking about Mike Vrabel, next man up in Tennessee. That is, like, if there's a team that I would equate to the Wisconsin of NFL, it'd be the New England Patriots, where it's like you have no idea who this person is that is stepping up to a key defensive position, but they're stepping up and then they're all of a sudden falling out. Like they like New England is the definition of a team. It's the definition of continuity. They haven't, like, the fact that they have both their offensive and defensive coordinators, play callers, as we know, are back. And Bill Belichick is still there. Yes, Tom Brady is a massive loss, but New England is still just too good for me.
Here's the other thing that I'd like to point out with that is that Denver is having to fly to New York to play the Jets and then come back and fly to New England to play the Patriots. Now, they talk about anytime you cross a time zone, it's going to take your body about a day to recover. So it's going to take them, they're going to fly out, most likely Saturday, to play the Jets, which I don't think they're going to be lethargic in that game, but then they're going to fly back to Denver, have only a couple days to prepare, and then turn around and fly back out to New England. And that's brutal on any team, especially on a young team where the guys haven't figured out that cross-country stuff. Like when you're talking about Penn State and KJ Hamler, like the farthest they're flying is from Nittany Valley to maybe Lincoln, Nebraska, most likely like Minnesota. It's really not even that much of a time. They go from Eastern time to Central time, but it's really not that big of a journey. But now you're talking about flying from the Rocky Mountains to the East Coast, and that's a totally different thing. So I think that's an underrated aspect.
You think they'll just stay there?
No, teams don't like doing that. It throws their stuff out of whack. Though it did work for the Raiders last season when they lost to the Colts and then stayed in Indianapolis before they flew to London to beat the Bears. So maybe the NFL's changing on that. Maybe teams are doing that. But no, I don't think they stay out on the East Coast.
Okay.
Week 6 matchup, they host the Miami Dolphins. Miami just has way too many questions. We don't know who the starting quarterback is. The offensive line has issues. I think their defense improved, but there's just way too many questions. Denver gets back in the win column.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the Dolphins are a cluster F-U-C-K. I don't think.
Oh, you're just trying to teach me how to spell, you prick.
Brady, prick.
P, Q, Batman symbol.
Okay, Peter. But yeah, I don't think the Dolphins are good enough to get this win, and another easy win for the Broncos.
Yeah, this is when the Broncos' schedule starts getting a little bit lighter. They're not playing these world-class defenses anymore. And I agree. As much as I think Miami's improved in general, this is when the Denver offense starts keeping the drive, and they start getting used to each other, and they start figuring out they get some chemistry going and they tear apart Miami.
All right, well, we've agreed on 5 straight picks here. Let's see if we make it 6. It's a home game against Kansas City, and I think the Denver Broncos are going to win. And here's why. I think Denver's going to get a lot of momentum coming off of the Miami game. I think it's going to be the game that for the first time this offense meshes really, really well and fires on all cylinders. I think they're going to take that momentum against a Kansas City team whose offensive line was not their strong suit last year. They had a good one, but it wasn't their strong suit, who has questions in the secondary position, who Kansas City, to me, they didn't decrease in ability, but they stayed the same. And anytime a team stays the same, to me, they take a step back. And case in point is the Green Bay Packers. How long did the Green Bay Packers, after winning a Super Bowl, keep pretty much the same team there? And year in and year out, you saw them fall just a little bit further behind. Kansas City's still going to win the AFC West. Kansas City isn't going to get swept by Denver. But in Denver, I have the Broncos winning that game.
Yeah, I'm on the same wavelength with you. I think this is going to be the game where Denver puts their stamp on the map and say, hey, take us seriously, and they're going to prove the potential that me and you see in them, Brady. I think that they're going to shock the world here. I think that the Denver wide receivers are good enough to have their way with the secondary in Kansas City. Even though they are stout at the safety position, the corner's a huge question mark. And when you're trying to cover KJ Hamler, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, I think that's just going to be so overwhelming that it leads them to the Broncos getting that upset.
I disagree with both of you. I think that, to Brady's point, the Kansas City defense has kind of stayed the same. But what I'll also say is that, and like while that can be detrimental seasons on, and the immediate season falling off, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Green Bay made it to the NFC Championship game and should have won it, right?
When the year after they won the Super Bowl?
Yeah.
No, they got bounced by the Giants in the divisional round that year they went 15-1.
Okay, well they still should have beat the Giants that year, in my opinion.
You're right.
But to my point, what I'm saying is that Drew Lock's, in the limited 5 games that we saw him in, his worst game by far was against Kansas City. I'll say Denver's offense at this point of the season will be much improved, but also I don't think that they're to the level of Kansas City's offense, who just got even better, in my opinion. Kansas City's offense is too good, and they showed it against a Denver defense last year. I think that it's going to be a much closer game than it was when Drew Lock played against him. It's not going to be a 3-23 game, and I still think that it's going to show that these are the two teams in the AFC West that are fighting it out. But I think that, again, because this team is so young compared to a Kansas City team, that their offense has been together for a long time, and their defense, they are the, again, consistency across all boards. I think that Kansas City wins the game.
You know, I mean, I understand your points. I do. And those are a lot of the same points that I'm going to put in their Week 13 matchup when they go to Kansas City. It's just Denver, to me, is going to need a season-defining win in order for me to justify the season that they're going to have. And this was the season-defining win. And it's not like Kansas City hasn't lost games to teams they shouldn't lose to. Case in point, we'll talk about the Tennessee game last season, the regular season one. Now, granted, it's Patrick Mahomes' first game back, but there really at that point wasn't a reason for Tennessee to be playing Kansas City that well. And that was the point in the season where I looked at Kansas City and mistakenly went, Kansas City's not a serious football team. Kansas City's going to get bounced in the divisional round or the championship round against New England or Baltimore. And I was wrong, and I'll eat my own, I'll eat my own words there. But I just present it, Mitch. But it's just I can't. I want to see Denver win this game, and maybe that's why I'm justifying this. Week 8, they have a bye. They come out of Week 9 with a game we already talked about in one of our first episodes, an Atlanta game. Atlanta has way too many questions in their secondary, way too many questions on their offensive line. I think that Denver's going to come in with momentum off the bye week after not only beating Kansas City, but winning the game before that, and they're going to get their 3rd straight win against the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is the third straight win for me as well. I think that the Denver Broncos match up pretty good against the Atlanta Falcons. Like I said with the Chiefs, I think the Denver wide receiver core and tight end core is gonna have their way with the Falcons secondary. Um, I don't. I think that the Denver defense is gonna wreak havoc on that offensive line in Atlanta. Even though they made some good additions, I don't think it's good enough to stop Von Miller, Bradley Chubb, and Jarrell Casey coming in the middle.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I think that I will continue to say this every time we talk about Atlanta because I wasn't on the Atlanta episode. That Atlanta needs to prove something to me, and until they do, they're not a good team. Um, they have the potential of being a really good team, but like the Denver Broncos, they're not making the right moves, in my opinion. Or like how the Denver Broncos used,
There you go.
like how the Denver Broncos used to work. The last like 3 seasons. So I also have, again, I think that this is the point of the season where Drew Lock and the Denver offense starts firing on all cylinders, and it's too much for a depleted Atlanta defense.
So at the halfway point of the season for Denver, that's exactly 8 games for them. I have Denver sitting at 5-3. Mitch, you have them sitting at 4-4. Skylar, you have them sitting at 3-5. So all a little bit different there. Week 10 matchup, they go to Las Vegas to play the Raiders. I have the Raiders being one of the worst teams in the NFL. I didn't really like their draft. I don't like that they're just drafting like the Alabama Clemson All-Stars. Questions on the offensive line. It's just getting older. Is Derek Carr really the best quarterback that they can have? I love Josh Jacobs as a halfback, but I think that the Broncos beat the Raiders in this matchup.
100% agree with you. I think the Raiders have a one-dimensional offense, and their defense is meh. So that's going to lead to another easy win for the Denver Broncos.
See, for me, the Raiders had a lot of games that they won last year that they had no business winning. If you look at that team on paper, there's no reason that team is 7-9 at the end of the season. Mm-hmm. There's no reason that they should have been 7-9. And I think that because of who John Gruden is, he builds a team that continues to be an underdog and continues to punch up. See, and I have Las Vegas surprising Denver this week because I think that at this point of the season, Las Vegas is going to be making some trades. They're going to be doing some things throughout the season that will, I think, help them out. I think that that it's on paper basically the same team that surprised teams that they shouldn't have surprised. Like they shouldn't have they shouldn't have come back and beat Chicago and London. So I think that this is a team that can get the win against Denver, and I think that they should. And I also, my surprise pick is I think Marcus Mariota is going to be the comeback player of the year for the NFL.
Oh, okay.
I think by this time, I think by week 9. I think by week 9, Marcus Mariota is the starting quarterback because, to your point, Derek Carr is not the best quarterback that they have on that roster, and I think Marcus Mariota has.
Exactly. There we go. MVP.
I think Marcus Mariota has a fire underneath him, and he was one of the most efficient quarterbacks in college at Oregon, and I think that he goes back to at the Raiders. I don't think the Raiders are going to be a playoff team, but I think that they're going to surprise a couple of people.
That's interesting. I'm interested to hear what your take is when we get to the Raiders, because I think we have them going in two very separate directions. Week 11 matchup, they host the LA Chargers. Los Angeles, to me, just has way too many questions. They really do. They upgraded on the offensive line with the trade with Carolina. We talked about it. I think Austin Eckler is a good halfback. I think Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are great wide receivers. Hunter Henry's a great tight end. They have good players on defense. There's no reason for the Chargers to really not be good except the quarterback position. I like Tyrod Taylor. I like him more than Justin Herbert because I hate Justin Herbert, and we're going to hear about it when we get to our episode. And it's not because he's from Oregon and they beat Wisconsin. I've never liked Justin Herbert. I have Denver winning this game. This is a classic AFC West matchup. Phillip Rivers, even with a better Chargers team against a worse Broncos team, still had issues beating Denver in Denver. I don't see that situation changing regardless of the quarterback position. I think at this point, the Chargers' offensive line is going to be dinged up, and that's going to leave a feast for the defensive line of the Denver Broncos. So the Chargers lose to Denver, and Denver picks up not their first, second, third, fourth, but their fifth straight win of the season.
Well, I agree with you yet again. I have a couple points for this win. One, I think that Herbert's going to be the starter at this point in the season, and I think Vic Fangio is going to feast upon that. And I believe in the Denver defensive line more than I believe in the Chargers offensive line. And so with those two deciding factors, I had to go with the Denver Broncos.
Agree with everything you guys have just said. I also think that Justin Herbert was not worthy of a
I was
first
waiting for a
grade.
but. I was waiting for a. I agree with everything you said.
But no. This is I'm not gonna pull that. I think that Justin Herbert had every opportunity to live up to the hype in Oregon and never really did against quality teams like Auburn or Utah. Like they did beat Utah, but that wasn't because of Justin Herbert.
Yeah.
And I think that again, Denver is the second best team in the AFC West. And after losing to the Raiders, they're done and they're going to destroy everyone in their path. So
interesting. Week 11 matchup, they host the New Orleans Saints. This would be the game that if I didn't already have them beating Kansas City earlier in the season, I would say could be the game that New Orleans trips up on. And I the point that I go back to is a couple seasons ago when Tyrod Taylor and the Browns went to New Orleans and with the exception of a missed field goal should have beaten the Saints. That was the year the Saints ended up going to the NFC Championship game. The Saints have a history of playing down to some lesser opponents. I think this is a game where they may do that, but the Saints are just an all-around way better team, and I think they end up beating Denver.
Yeah, I think the Saints are going to win this game. I'm pretty sure I've said this point before, but I truly believe this is going to be Drew Brees' last year, just based off of that contract he just signed to go on TV. I don't think they're going to wait 2 years. This will be his last year. And with that said, I think everyone's going to have that extra motivation to play better and work harder and try to get Drew Brees one more ring. And I don't think they're going to let the Denver Broncos stop them.
yeah, I'd have to agree with you guys. I think that I think that this is going to be a close game. Honestly, this is one of my games of the week for this week. Because I think that we're going to be seeing an ascendant Denver team against one of the top NFC teams. And I think that it's going to be tough. But I have New Orleans winning.
All right, so we all agree again. Mitch, you and I have agreed on every pick so far except for the first one. So let's see if we can keep going. Week 13 matchup at Kansas City. I don't think Kansas City is going to get swept by Denver. I think at this point, Kansas City is going to be fighting in conjunction with Baltimore for who's going to get that first seed and that first round bye. In that situation, I give it to Kansas City here. I think the Chiefs are going to avenge a loss earlier in the season. I think even without fans, Arrowhead is a difficult place to play. And let's also talk about the fact that Missouri is one of the states that is starting to allow people to recongregate. And so I think that game, and I think that game has fans in it, and a really just packed Arrowhead Stadium is difficult to play at. Kansas City wins that game against Denver.
Yeah, I agree with you yet again. I think that the Chiefs are going to show everybody who truly runs the AFC West here, and I think they're just going to dominate the Denver Broncos in this game.
Yeah, for every reason I had them winning in week 7, I have them winning in week 13. I think Kansas City is just too good of a team. They stayed consistent, unless barring some massive injury. Knock on wood. I think Kansas City is the top of the AFC West and the AFC.
Yeah, agreed. And even with the Patrick Mahomes injury, Kansas City still went 1-1 without him, and
with Matt Moore.
And they probably should have beaten Green Bay.
You hush your mouth. We won that fair and square.
I know that we won it fair and square, but if it wasn't for, that throw that Rodgers puts to Jamal Williams in the corner of the end zone,
yeah, buddy,
I think to me might be the best throw Aaron Rodgers has ever had in his career.
Is that the Jared Cook throw?
But I don't know, man.
The
I think in
Jared
terms
Cook
of
throw is
just,
pretty baller.
I think in terms of just ball placement, maybe that throw to Jamal Williams, because he just teardropped it right in, and it was a thing of beauty. But we can't keep talking about the Packers. They're going to be on the next Saturday's episode. Week 14 matchup against Carolina or at Carolina. We've talked about this already. Carolina to me just has way too many questions. You may as well call them the Carolina Temple Owls because of all the guys that Matt Rule is bringing in. They only address the defense in the draft, and I think that while their defense maybe has improved, their offense is still really stagnant, even with Christian McCaffrey. Denver wins that game against the Owls. I mean, the Panthers.
I agree with you yet again. I think that the Panthers are a really big mess. I don't think that anybody knows what truly is the direction of this team, even inside their building. And with all that kind of chaos and the way that their team is constructed right now, with basically being Christian McCaffrey, and that's about it, I think Denver is going to have an easy win here.
I think that Carolina is actually building for something really awesome, but they lose this game. Like this season is going to be Matt Rule's worst season in Carolina in the next 4 or 5 years, because I think that with both Tom Brady and Drew Brees getting up in age, that within the next 2 years, the NFC South is going to be thrown into disarray because most likely Matt Ryan's going to be gone too. So I think that because looking forward, Carolina has stability, but this is going to be their worst year. I agree with you. Everything. Their offense is Christian McCaffrey. Teddy Bridgewater was a nice pickup, but not good enough.
He doesn't really have
Denver
any weapons
wins.
to play with.
Yeah,
Honestly.
I don't like
Besides
him on
Christian
this
Mc-
team.
I think that he allows them to like run, like he gives them some versatility, and I agree that if Teddy Bridgewater hadn't been injured, Minnesota could have easily been a perennial playoff team for the last couple of years, but he did, and that sucks.
Yeah.
And we saw what he did with a really good New Orleans team, but it's because New Orleans was really good.
Yeah.
I think that Carolina is building for something great, but it is not there.
It's definitely a work in progress. Week 15 matchup. This is another game that I have starred. We talked about in the Buffalo game. This to me seems like a game that Buffalo drops. It seems like a trap game. I've been high on the Broncos. Go back and listen to the Buffalo episode. It backs me up on that. I think that while the Buffalo Bills have a really underrated defense, I don't know how their offense is going to work. I think there's still questions on the offensive line, and I think when you're going up against that defensive line that Denver has, it's going to be ridiculous. I think that while maybe they upgraded their wide receiver core with Stephon Diggs, no doubt about that, it can't be so one-dimensional. It can't just be Josh Allen throwing the ball for sub 50% completion rating, and that's the issue. That's where we haven't seen the Bills' offense take that step. And I think instead Denver takes that step and beats the Bills.
Yeah, I agree with you again. I think this is textbook trap game. I really only had to think about one question to make my pick here, and it is, do I trust the Bills offense more or do I trust the Broncos offense more? And I'm going with the Broncos. I think their offense is going to be more effective, and like I said, I trust them more, so I got to go with Denver.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think that Buffalo is in a key, like in this last part of the season, they're in a key part where if they want to prove to everybody that they're the new power in the AFC East, they need to win, and they don't because it's Buffalo. I'm sorry. Yeah. I mean, it's well. I didn't get to talk about Buffalo. I get that they're improved, but I don't understand the hype of them now being the perennial AFC East team. The only thing that really changed was Tom Brady left. Denver wins this game.
To me, when I go through the schedule, and I have to renege Buffalo fans because I actually had the Bills winning the AFC East, and when I revisited my schedule, I don't have them winning the AFC East, and in large part, it's because of this game due to a head-to-head matchup where the Broncos beat the Bills, but they lose to the Patriots. So it's sorry, Buffalo. I still have Buffalo making the playoffs, just not winning the AFC East. Week 16 matchup at the Chargers. I had Denver. I know I can't justify Denver going 5-1 in the AFC West because it's the AFC West and because I think teams like Denver, the Chargers, and the Raiders have the ability to just beat the crap out of each other. But when I decided which team do I have more question marks on, the Raiders or the
Chargers?
I decided I had more questions on the Raiders, so I actually have the Chargers beating
What are you
Denver.
talking about?
What?
He was talking about how the fact that the AFC West beats the shit out of each other every year,
Yeah.
and that there's always like how I had the Raiders beating Denver earlier, where they have no reason to. It just happens in the AFC West every year.
Oh, I thought he was confusing the teams.
No.
No.
I'm saying that which team do I have more question marks on in terms of their ability to play? And I've decided I have more question marks on the Raiders than I do the Chargers because the Chargers have so many good pieces. They have Keenan Allen, they have Hunter Henry.
Oh, I get what you're saying now.
So if they can mesh together, I don't have them doing that this season, but I have them doing that in this win against Denver.
I guess this is the second time we disagree. So sad. I think that Denver Broncos are going to get a win here. Like I said, I don't trust the Chargers offense. It's a lot of question marks, and I've got to see a ton of stuff before I can have faith in them. But their defense might keep them in the game, but I think the Denvers are going to get a clean sweep over the LA Chargers.
Yeah, I think it's in this game that LA gets their top 10 pick, in my opinion, because I don't trust the Chargers organization. I think that they have the right pieces to build towards it, and I have Denver losing their weird AFC West game earlier in the season. So I think that Denver wins this game.
Interesting. So, Mitch, you and I have only disagreed twice. Mitch, you and Skylar have only disagreed twice so far. Week 17 matchup, they host the Oakland Raiders. I have them clean sweeping the Raiders. I just have way too many questions on the team. I don't think John Gruden is the coach that he used to be. I don't think he knows how to build a modern NFL team. And I think the case in point to that is that he's had a lot of draft picks, especially first-round draft picks, while he's been in Oakland, and there's still huge question marks on him, especially the big one being Cleveland Farrell. We don't know how he's going to produce. Was he worth the number 4 overall pick? No. I think some of the other ones have panned out, but I have Denver winning that, and with that, they cement a playoff berth.
I agree with you. I have Denver getting a clean sweep of the Raiders. The Raiders are just a big mess to me, and I think that even though this is kind of like the NFC East, where it could go like either way with when some of the teams like play each other, but the Raiders are just such a mess with their offense being one-dimensional. Their defense is so meh, and that their head coach is outdated, and their GM is TV draft analyst. So with all that, Broncos get another win.
I have Denver winning this game, but I feel like I need to defend the Raiders just real quick because I don't agree with you guys that this team is just shit. I think that they prove time and time and again that people underestimate them, and then they beat them. In Drew Lock's only game against the Raiders last year, he barely won that game. He threw for 177 yards. He had 1 touchdown. He was sacked twice, and he averaged 7 yards per attempt. He wasn't good. He did the bare. He still beat them, but 16-15 against a horrible Raiders team. So what I'm telling you is that, and I think that their defense has actually gotten better. We talked about how they got I can't think of his name, but the linebacker out of Chicago. Yeah, they've gotten some veteran presence on that defense that I think makes them better. Again, they're not a playoff team. I don't think so. I agree with a lot of what you guys say, but I don't think they're as bad as people say that they're going to be this next season. That's just my opinion. Denver still wins the game.
Yeah. Here's my response to that. This definitely is a trap game for Denver in the similar way as like Todd Bowles' season in the Jets, where they were 10-5, and all they needed to do was beat, I think it was the Bills, in order to get in the playoffs, and they lost. And I think this could be a game that could affect that. But my point to you, Skyler, is that while it was maybe the worst day offensively for Drew Lock, as an offense, Denver only had 238 yards. As a defense, they gave up 477 yards, and yet they only gave up 15 points. So Denver's defense, even at that point, was giving up 500 yards and only 15 points. And just don't trust the Raiders. I can't trust the Raiders because I don't trust John Gruden. He had one good season in Tampa when he inherited a team that Tony Dungy built. Let's not pretend like John Gruden built that Super Bowl winning team in Tampa, and I'm sick and tired of people saying it. Tony Dungy built that team, and then he got canned and went to Indianapolis, where eventually he won a Super Bowl. But he should have won a Super Bowl a few years earlier with Tampa, and it's always been one of the biggest point of contentions with me. But to wrap up, Mitch, you and I both have the Denver Broncos going 10-6. Skyler, you have them going 8-8. Skyler, is 8-8 good enough for the Denver Broncos to make the playoffs?
No, it's not. No team in that. No 8. I'll have to double check, but I don't think I have any team that is 8-8 making the playoffs.
So while he double checks, Mitch, is 10-6 good enough for Denver to make the playoffs?
Yep, the Broncos are the new 7th seed.
7th seed. All right. I have them as the 6th seed at 10-6, and the reason that I have them as the 6th seed is in large part due to that crucial win against Buffalo late in the season. Just as the same way as I had in the last episode, Dallas being the 6th instead of the 5th over being the 6th instead of the 5th seed was due to their loss to Minnesota. I think this late season win to Buffalo catapults Denver into the 6th seed, but that just means that they have to play the 3 seed. And when we get to them, it's going to piss you guys off, but when we get to them, it's going to be interesting. So the next episode we have is the Detroit Lions, a team that we've hinted at a couple of times. I don't think we've talked about them very much. I know we talked about them with the Atlanta and the Arizona episodes, I believe. But
and Chicago.
Of course. So we haven't talked about them very much, but they are interesting. This is a team that a lot of people say is on the incline. So if you're a Lions fan, tune in. Obviously, me and Mitch are Packer fans. And I think we did a good job in the Chicago episode of being impartial to some of their abilities. The Lions episode, I hope we're going to do another good job of it, but we're probably going to piss some people off. So if you're pissed off, email us. You can reach us at fourthstringsp@gmail.com, FOURTH stringsp@gmail.com. Please also follow us on YouTube. We are also up on Spotify and SoundCloud at Fourth String Sports Podcast. Go subscribe, listen, comment on the videos, and find us on Facebook and Twitter, Fourth String Sports Podcast. Before we sign off here, gentlemen, do you have any other things that you would like to talk about?
I think just one. Just out to the fans out there, don't be afraid to hit us up on our social media platforms. We want it. We love it. We'll take any kind of question.
We did have a question. Did I tell you that? We got our first one? We did have one. They said, why do you guys hate the fucking Falcons so much?
Can I answer this one?
To that listener.
No, Patriot fan.
To that listener, Skyler wasn't on the Falcons episode, which is good because he probably would have had them going 0-16. But he had them blowing a 28-3 lead in the game. But
the flag of the score.
Yeah.
Yeah, 28-3. 28-3.
But
best Super Bowl ever.
Yeah. To that listener, if you have anything constructively that you have in terms of our points, let us know. We're happy to talk about them. But we did get our first email. I did not dignify a response because I think our response is in the episode enough. But if you guys have anything that you actually want to talk about with these episodes, email us, comment on the videos, that kind of stuff. Skylar, do you have anything else you want to talk about?
I'm going to respond to that question because I wasn't on that Atlanta episode. And I have been giving Atlanta
a lot of hate.
No, and I have been giving Atlanta a lot of hate. This is why I don't trust Atlanta. Robert Quinn is a defensive coach. His defenses have consistently gotten – I said Dan Quinn, didn't I?
You said Robert Quinn.
Sorry, Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn is a defensive coach. He made the Legion of Boom in Seattle. But consistently his defensive teams have been getting worse and worse. He refuses to replace things on the offensive line and chooses to pick up former first-round picks instead of actually looking for good players. Matt Ryan is declining in ability. The only good player on that offense, in my opinion, they did add Todd Gurley, which could do some things, but is Julio Jones. And Julio Jones honestly deserves to pack up and go somewhere else.
I love for Calvin
Atlanta.
Ridley.
Calvin Ridley again.
You always forget about him.
That's the second or third time
I always forget about
Calvin.
Bama fans, send in your hate to Skyler.
Sure. I don't care. Atlanta has proven again, time and time again, that they could live up to the hype, and they had a chance to compete in a very questionable NFC South. But now because Tom Brady is there, now because the Saints have proven that they are the perennial all-stars, Atlanta had their chance. They are not an ascendant team in the NFC, and they won't be an ascendant team in the NFC until Dan Quinn is fired.
And to go
Fair
back to
enough.
my prediction, till Dan Quinn is fired and Dabo Sweeney is hired. So,
Forgot about
and Trevor Lawrence is there, and then they bring in Hunter Renfro, and they bring in Deshaun Watson too, and DeAndre.
that. Yeah, I hope
just
Renfro gets
all
drafted
Clemson.
this year.
Yeah. You know, he was on the first team that Clemson fielded back in 1896, right?
Yeah, he's been on all 3 championship teams.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate everybody for tuning in. Again, let us know. Please hit us up. This is obviously a DIY situation. We're always happy to listen to you guys. We're happy for any sort of comments or anything. As we state on the next episode, we have Detroit. Hopefully by then, we're going to hear some stuff in terms of the MLB. We mentioned them on the last episode in terms of there's definitely been an increase in talks of them coming back, but realistically, are they? As well as we'll get a lot closer to the NBA returning. NBA is set to return July 31st, which is T-minus, what's today, the 13th? T-minus 18 days from now. So we have less than 3
July
weeks.
31st. This is July 31st. This is June.
Oh, July 30th. So we have T-minus 49 days until they come back.
Yes.
But even then, we're still going to continue to hear how the situation resumes. But yeah, please, guys, let us know. Thank you so much for tuning in. And everybody have a marvelous day.